on that play.
And another foul on Ward. His third for setting a screen.
Physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen.
Bridges, pick and roll. And a foul, offensive foul coming up. Ted Valentine standing right there.
Same play for Michigan here. Offensive.
Well, there it is, everyone. Our long-awaited intro song that was put together by DJ Jazzy Burkhart on the ones and twos. Long overdue, but Dylan, I think you did some great work there. That's your finest work, if anything.
Easily my finest audio work of the podcast thus far.
Really impressive, though. Is this one going to have the addition of last night's call?
No, we don't have that yet. I've not broken down the film to cut that into it yet. This is we still have to give the people an introduction though. This is the moving screen. We're going to talk about Michigan State and Michigan basketball today. Go through some Big Ten power rankings. Just because we have an intro song doesn't mean we can just drop our entire.
I think the people know
intro.
What they're getting at this point on this podcast. The moving screen. It's a national brand, a national commodity now. There's a logo. There's an intro song. I'm working on some billboards. This thing's blowing up. It helps that this podcast happens to focus on two top 5, top 6 teams in the country. Did you see that stat by Kyle Austin this week?
I did. It really speaks to kind of how it's funny to me because 3 times basically in the last 10 years, both teams have finished in the top 10 on KenPom.
Yeah.
And yet they've never been in the top 5 at the same time. It kind of speaks to how flawed polls can be, if you ask me. But it is a good time to have a Michigan State podcast. And right now it looks like they're the only good teams in the Big Ten.
Yeah, so this is from Kyle Austin, Michigan State's basketball beat writer for MLive. And if you guys, for anyone who doesn't know what we're referencing, it's this week marks the first time in the 71 season history of the AP poll that both Michigan and Michigan State are in the top 6. So here we are. It's been a hell of a year. I think it's only going to continue this way. The collision course that is starting to be paved toward February 24th, that first meeting between the two, and then the second one on March 9th in the Big Ten season finale. Like, it's, everything kind of goes as planned. This could be some, I hate this word, but this could be some epic stuff if these two, run into each other under the current circumstances. So we'll see. I know I'd love to see it. People who hem and haw about the rivalry, I think can all join in the fact that it would be great for both programs if that actually played out that way. It'd be pretty awesome. But
do you think that it's better or worse that both games are in the last 3 weeks of the season?
So I'm split on it because on one hand, college basketball is such a unique thing in that, like, you can get different teams by month. Like, I think if the two played in November, Michigan would have beaten Michigan State. If the two played at points in December, Michigan State would have beaten Michigan. And both of those things are, like, both teams are real then, and you're not sure which version you're going to ultimately get in March. Michigan has proven that over the years where you just get different versions through the year, and then suddenly they go on a run or whatever it might be, as has Michigan State. So, that's part of college basketball, and that's part of having a schedule, is that teams figure themselves out. On the other hand, while it's painful to wait for this game to ultimately get here, we're still, 6-7 weeks out, whatever. If these two do hold form, that's great. I mean, it's great for college basketball for those two games if it actually plays out that way, where they're both 1-2 in the league and blah blah blah, and you get them at peak form, peak time, everything on the table. If the game's played now, it would be great right now, but would anyone really remember it? I'm not sure. When they play later in the year, there's a really good chance that those are two memorable events.
Yeah, back in 2013, when it was kind of Michigan and Indiana that were going back and forth, they met when they were 7-1, and it was right at like the first weekend in February, and that was the game that was super hyped. And by the end of the year, it's almost more settled. That game still ended up being very important, but I wonder, like, I would like to see kind of the narrative and how that could change if there was a game maybe in the start of February and then close the season with it. It could be. Instead, there's a chance that the hype just kind of keeps crescendoing toward it, but it is certainly, you kind of have to buy into the hype along the way, because there's not
I'm buying
a first chapter. There's not a first chapter in the, like, I'd like to see an early game too, I think.
But you want to see an early game just because you want to see them play right now. It's not, like
It adds a level of depth to the conference race.
Well, this is true, but that's also because the conference race right now is kind of starting to unravel into only being two teams, and I don't know. We'll get into that when we get into the rankings, but all I know is if these two can just keep it like this way, I think it'll be great. It'll be great for basketball in the state of Michigan. It'll be great for the rivalry in terms of getting into that status of, why can't this be a rivalry as good as Duke, North Carolina, or whatever you want to throw out there. I think it's great for this to take center stage. So, it's just a matter of patience, which I know I lack, but we'll get there eventually. So, we'll start with last night, right, Dylan?
Yeah, you were up in East Lansing. Let's start with Michigan State today.
Yeah, pretty sound performance. It's going to take workman-like games to win the league this year, and this was a really good example from Michigan State playing a Purdue team that is pretty flawed in a number of areas, but I was impressed with the job that was done on Carson Edwards. There were a lot of really interesting mixed match defensive matchups with Nojal Eastern guarding Carson Edwards, Cassius Winston for a lot of the night, trying to put some height and physicality on him and kind of see how he could handle it. And it took a while, but once he kind of got into his comfort zone in the game, Cassius proved what he is, and that is right now he's the best guard in the Big Ten. So between that and the defensive performance that Michigan State, notably Matt McQuaid and Aaron Henry, were able to put together on Carson Edwards, good win, sound win, nothing to, I think, sound the horns about or anything, but what were your impressions from afar?
It's a win that you should get if you're Michigan State, but if you're should win games by 18 points and shutting down the guy that everyone thought was going to be the conference player of the year, you take that and you move on. I mean, I was really impressed with how well Michigan State just dominated Purdue on the glass. That was really, I think they rebounded almost 55%, over half of their missed shots, which is a crazy number and something that we haven't talked a ton about with Michigan State, but they're really a dominant offensive rebounding team this year. A couple years back, they kind of had a fall off in that regard, and they're rebounding 41% of their misses in league play. And when you have Cassius Winston throwing up threes and then you still have a chance of going to get it off the glass, they just kind of overwhelmed Purdue, which, like you say, I think Purdue is a flawed team, and they did a great job of exposing those flaws, but it was a really strong performance, I thought. And Cassius Winston, again, started slow and then just finished the game down the last 2/3 or so of action.
Yeah, it really says something. Like, Michigan State really didn't play that well. At no stretches were they looking like their best version, and they still scored 77 points, 1.2 points per possession. They shot over 50%. I think it was like around 55%. Multiple scorers, like 8 or 9 guys got in on the scoring on the first half alone. This is a team that it does have, might not have that knock your socks off talent, but they've all played so many games. They have so much experience that when it gets into a game like this, the first 15 minutes can often say very little because they're really figuring themselves out on a lot of these games. I'm starting to find where they just kind of get into the groove and start to really read how opponents are playing them And on some of these freshman-reliant teams that they've had in recent years, you don't really get that. You're just trying to out-talent guys. But, this team is definitely able to play and figure out what teams are doing to them and then adjust. And you saw it on a lot of there'd be, a post touch and then a kick to the opposite side, kick out of the post to the opposite side, and they were just feasting on that for a while. And, once that adjustment was made, everyone was on the same page, that shot was there if they wanted it. And, that shows a lot of improvement. That shows smart teams, or that's what smart teams do. So I really do continue to see, like, game-by-game progress with this Michigan State team, and it's been really, really impressive. Are you following along with that?
Yeah, and what do you think of – I feel like it's kind of been a big little stretch here for Aaron Henry. I think he's really kind of coming into his own. He had some really good defensive possessions. He seems like a guy who can – he's out, like, at the start of the year, we said he could help unlock the ceiling for Michigan State, but I think, especially with the Langford's injury, we're starting to see him get a few extra chances here and there, and he gives them that extra element that I think really helps. Any thoughts on how he's played?
Yeah, I mean, his athleticism too is kind of underrated because Michigan State doesn't have a lot of elite athletes. They have a bunch of basketball players, it seems like, and Henry does have some sneaky athleticism where he can kind of explode into the basket a little bit more than a lot of guys on the team. He gives them just a really different wrinkle. He's made some huge shots and some big defensive plays in both of the last two games, the second half at Ohio State and throughout the second half last night. Henry made key plays in key moments. It wasn't too big for him. It was funny. There was one moment in a key possession late against Purdue, and they got it close a little bit, and Henry's kind of standing in the corner, and he just whiffed on getting the play. Like, I don't know if he wasn't paying attention or whatever, but they just went through an entire offensive possession, and he had no idea what play was being run, and it turned into a turnover, and he's walking down court looking at the bench saying, I didn't get the play, I didn't know. And the fact that he stayed in the game says everything you need to know about, how the staff feels about Aaron Henry and how important he is. They left him in there, and he played through it. A lot of guys, upperclassmen included, are getting the hook in that moment.
But I guess the one other person we should probably hit on is Matt McQuaid. I know you wrote about him today, and he did a hell of a job defensively against Carson Edwards, and he is also shooting the ball. I mean, he's playing really well, and he gives them an element that I think might be more obvious now that Langford's hurt.
For sure. And in working on the story, I did notice if you pull up their games rated by defensive efficiency, McQuaid missed 3 games. 3 of those 4 games are their worst 4 performances in regard to defensive efficiency, and that's not a coincidence. Kenny Goins put it best. So the whole premise of my story is Matt McQuaid really doesn't talk that much to media. He's very, it's not that it's not a combative silence. He just doesn't say that much. So I just went around and asked everyone else about him. And one of the things that Kenny Goins said that kind of stuck out was basically you're going to underrate him. And when you underrate him, he's going to go get 12 or 15 points and make a big 3, and you're going to forget about him. And then on the other end, he's going to take your best score and he's going to hold him to half of your points. And you have to coach, basically you got to coach around that if you are, Otis is coming in for a visit. If you are going to beat Michigan State, you have to figure out a way to do it. And a lot of times you're going to have to figure out a way to do it without your leading scorer getting his full allotment. And if McQuaid can do that, I mean, with everything else they have, notably Winston, Ward, that's such a huge glue piece to have.
And the fact that he's shooting 45% from 3, it really opens things up for that priority of forcing the ball into Nick Ward or giving Winston space. Like, that's floor space, and it's not always guaranteed in other lineups, and he's just been close to automatic. He's shooting 54% from three-point range in Big Ten games. That's a pretty ideal 3-and-D guy right there that is getting the job done as a senior.
No doubt. And I think he's just going to continue through the season, and he's going to be a guy that makes major shots, and they're going to look to him to make major shots. I mean, they will dial him up with the game on the line, and most of the guys on that roster are fine with him taking that shot.
Yeah, and it's not like a situation with if you're dialing him up, he's gonna have a good shot, right? You're not dialing him up to go create his own shot and get a tough bucket. But if you're running an action that ends up in his hands, that's a winning possession basically at any point if he's able to get a good look at the basket.
For sure. How do you rate a win over Purdue right now? Is it a quality win?
Right now, yes. It's at home. It's not. I tend to say any home win in the Big Ten is not particularly impressive, but I think I have a lot of takes on Purdue here. Purdue is not a great team. Purdue has played a really tough schedule, and we give them credit for that. But I just don't see how good this Purdue team can really be. Everyone is knocking Carson Edwards and saying, oh, he takes bad shots. But if you look at the other 4 players that are on the court with him at any given time, I don't really know if Carson Edwards can take a bad shot. I mean, there's just no one else on that team that's trying to do anything. You pass the ball to Ryan Klein, he's either going to shoot or pass it. You pass the ball to Nojel Eastern, he might drive around a bit, but he can't shoot. They don't have a big guy who they can really rely on. I just don't know what the situation is and how you fix that. Even Carson Edwards went, 3 of 15 or something like that yesterday, but he's not taking bad shots. There's no one else to shoot on that team. And then you flip it around, and what no one really wants to talk about is that he's also a pretty bad defender. Mm-hmm. So you have to put players next to him that might not be great offensively just to try to make up for his defense, and it's just I don't know what the answer is for Purdue going forward.
But it's a huge luxury for Michigan State to be able to put McQuaid on Edwards, let him run around with him, let him, check him every single time, because it's a lot of work. That's pretty taxing stuff to do, and McQuaid embraces it, and that then alleviates Cassius Winston from having to do it, because if you just put their rosters on paper, it would make, you just put the heights and weights and look at the matchups, it would make sense that Edwards would be guarded by Winston. But, Izzo smart enough to know that you don't have to do that. McQuaid's probably a better matchup because he's a better defensive player. But more importantly, I feel like it keeps your best offensive option from having to deal with that, because Winston's exhausted as it is on any given day. He's basically being asked to do everything under the sun. So that's a really significant card to have in the pocket for Michigan State.
Yeah, do you see Matt McQuaid or Josh Langford as the better Michigan State perimeter defender?
It's tough. I'd probably say McQuaid, actually. Yeah, he's just craftier.
Izzo has said multiple times that Langford's their best defender, talking about him being out, but the numbers, and I just think the eye test kind of back up that McQuaid's the more important defensive piece. Michigan State's actually, I had the numbers here for when Langford's off the court, they're actually 12 points better per 100 possessions defensively without Langford than with him, which kind of speaks to, I would say, McQuaid's impact and maybe the chance of getting some other lineups, or just a random small sample size, which you can't discount because McQuaid didn't play in the loss to Louisville, things like that.
Right. Yeah, I think he also missed the Iowa game too. But okay, well, so
either way,
this weekend it's a trip on the road, Penn State for Michigan State. I don't see that being too much of an issue. Penn State, I think, is kind of going from bad to worse right now. Things are a little bit off the rails with the whole Pat Chambers suspension and blah blah blah, and they just got. They got waxed by somebody, didn't they? Was it Wisconsin?
Wisconsin at home.
Beat them by about 20 or something. That's after the loss at Michigan. This thing does have a very good chance of going completely off a cliff, it feels like. But it's also one of those, if they're going to play for their coach, if you want to come up with some kind of narrative for Penn State, it would be if they're going to play for their coach, this would be the time. He's coming back. This is his first game back after suspension. Maybe that plays out. I'm not seeing that. What are you thinking on this?
So you look at the two teams on paper, and you think that Penn State could be a good matchup for Michigan State just in terms of personnel. They have a big guy who can hang with Nick Ward. They have really athletic guards who can make Cassius Winston's life tough in Wheeler and Reeves. And they have a 4-man who can play inside and outside. So it all, like, on paper it all fits, but then here's the problem. Penn State just can't score. Penn State has the worst offense in the Big Ten, worse than Rutgers. Rutgers has never finished without the worst offense in the Big Ten since they joined. So if you're Penn State, you don't want to be down there. You're scoring, I think, 88 points per 100 possessions, 85 points per 100 possessions in Big Ten games. That's just horrible. And all of Penn State's shooters are shooting terribly in Big Ten games after shooting pretty well early. So I think they can maybe slow down Michigan State's offense at home for a bit, but I don't know that they can shoot nearly well enough to make it count for anything. So I could see an ugly game, but I don't really see them having a chance. And I'm not buying into any narrative about playing for Pat Chambers. They could have been doing that for the last 5 years.
Well, and they have a game before that. I forgot that while Michigan State doesn't play, obviously they played last night on Tuesday, and they'll have the trip this weekend out there. Penn State's at Nebraska tonight, on Thursday night. So a little bit of a tight turnaround there too, and I'm imagining they'll be blasted at Nebraska because that's a team that desperately needs a good performance at home. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a wounded dog situation. Michigan State will probably wax Penn State pretty good, and that sounds about right to me.
I want to see Cassius Winston against super athletic guards, though. I think that'll be between Josh Reeves and Jamari Wheeler. They're both super athletic, super good defenders that can really force turnovers and steal the ball, and that could at least, I don't know that it's going to stop Winston, but it'll kind of give us a preview of games where Winston has struggled in the past and how he might handle that this year.
I will go on the record and say that they end up overplaying him, and he ends up getting them on the yo-yo, and his feel right now for the game, he didn't play well last night. He had like 5 turnovers and did some uncharacteristic things, and he was pretty gassed at the end. But overall, the way that he's seeing the court and dictating what defenses do right now is at the highest level. And Michigan State's up to second in the country in offensive efficiency because Cassius Winston is where's he in the national conversation on guards right now?
I would have to look at the.
It's tough.
It's tough. He is certainly in the conversation at the top of the Big Ten, just in terms of best player. I just don't know. I would have to look at I haven't handicapped the national point guard race before this podcast. Apparently, I should have.
I mean, it's the kid at Murray State, right? Morant, I believe his name is, and Marcus Howard at Marquette. I mean, there's a handful of others, but he's got to be right in that conversation. And I mean, I put it out on Twitter last night that right now he's the best guard in the Big Ten, and I obviously got accosted by Michigan fans.
You basically can't talk about either point guard without the other Michigan or Michigan State fanboy base.
Fanboys fine.
Losing their mind over it, that head-to-head matchup.
Yeah, it's kind of annoying, but because the interesting thing is, I get what Michigan fans say, where they say, oh well, Xavier Simpson has kind of put him in a closet the times that they've played and blah blah blah, and that's great. That is, it's hard to argue. But if you look at this, the 2018-19 season, and anyone who's watched all the teams in the Big Ten will tell you, it's pretty clear that Cassius Winston's been the best guard in the Big Ten this year, and Carson Edwards isn't second. Right now, Jordan Poole is second.
Carson Edwards in Big Ten games,
he's been
39% on twos, 25% on threes, 13 turnovers to 8 assists.
There you have it.
Carson Edwards might be the Big Ten Player of the Year if he played on Michigan State or Michigan, but he's not the Big Ten Player of the Year on Purdue.
Right.
He just doesn't have. It's not working out for me. Right. I'm not buying any of that. Is Cassius Winston a favorite for Big Ten Player of the Year for you?
I think right now, yeah, I would. If I'm handicapping it, I would put him right there. And it's kind of difficult to come up with any clear number two, really, because the Michigan guys kind of eliminate each other. And you look at like in Indiana, and I think for a while there, you could maybe make a case for Juwan Morgan being in that conversation. And, is that going to be maintained? And he's hasn't done it, the couple games here or there. Where else are you
Ethan Happ?
looking? Ethan Happ, yeah, Ethan Happ's number 2. Sorry, that's a good point.
Yeah.
He was my preseason guy, and I think I said last week that I still expect him to win it. But, it's got to be Happ and Winston right now. What do you make of the Michigan guys?
Michigan is tough because, like you say, if you had to pick one Michigan player and put him on the All Big Ten team, that answer changes every 3 weeks.
Right.
Who you would pick.
Right now, I think it's Jordan.
And a month ago, you would have got laughed out of the room if you
100%.
said it was Jordan Poole.
Right.
So how are you going to say one of those guys? You basically have to be the lone wolf. It's a word that is hard to win when you play on a very deep team. And it's not that Michigan's deep, but Michigan is deep within their roles, I guess you could say. They have multiple scorers, facilitators, all that.
For sure. Yeah, like this week you could have Matthews, who played really well against Indiana, say he goes out and lights up Illinois and Northwestern, whatever. Oh, man, Charles Matthews is making a run for Player of the Year. And then the next week, Ignas Brazdeikis goes and puts together a handful of great performances. And I think that's going to be the way it goes for them. So, yeah, it'll be pretty tough. But Player of the Year conversation on January 9th is fairly useless. So, is that it on Michigan State? Do we have anything else to touch on?
I think I'm ready to go. We can talk about Michigan's 2 upcoming games here, unless you have anything left over.
Yeah, we already talked about the Indiana game when we did the post-game pod on Sunday. So we're just going to look ahead to these upcoming matchups. Illinois on Thursday, Northwestern on Sunday. A road game at Illinois, like on paper, it looks like nothing. Ken Palm has it as an 82% chance to win for Michigan, which is exceedingly high for a league road game, obviously. But you can't say it's a guarantee. You just can't think about league road games that way. I haven't seen any games played there in a while. Like, I don't even know what the environment is. It's usually a really difficult place to play. But this is a 4-11 team, and their 4 wins of this year are Evansville, Mississippi Valley State, UNLV, and East Tennessee State. I can't imagine that the charges are coming out for a cold Thursday night in Champaign.
You have to realize, though, Michigan's a top 5 team coming in. Mm-hmm. They're gonna draw fans. People are gonna be fired up to see that game. And Illinois, basically everything about them has to be put into the context of how hard their schedule has been this year. They've played the 5th toughest schedule. They haven't played a Big Ten home game yet.
Which is insane.
It's just been brutal. They went to Maui for no good reason. So they're 4-11, 0-4. But they're also Iowa, Rutgers, and Penn State have all been outscored by more points per 100 possessions in Big Ten games, despite Illinois not playing a home game. So that says something. They're not terrible. They're not as bad as you would think for a team with their record, I would say. And you have to give them credit. At least they do have a game plan in the sense of they're going to go balls to the wall and try to force as many turnovers as they can. They do that, but they also foul and give up layups as much as any team in the country. So the game plan doesn't really work, but they do execute it. They have talent. Like it's definitely, I don't see it as a situation where Michigan can just walk in there and cakewalk to a victory, but it's also not really a game where you say, oh, this 4-11 team looks super dangerous either.
Yeah, and it's really tough. It's always the interesting situation when you see the teams that are reliant on creating turnovers and creating chaos playing a team like Michigan. and Beilein's ability to just coach around some things. And this is a team that has a number of guys who can put the ball, on the deck and advance the ball up the court at any given time. And that's really the key. Who can you put in the middle? They have multiple options. And I'm trying to remember last year's. They only played once last year. Michigan won by 10 down there. But nothing sticks out about that night.
Couple things about that game. It was Michigan's second worst performance in terms of turnover rate. They turned the ball over on 21.4% of their possessions. So Illinois did turn them over. The craziest thing, I was looking back to write my preview today, and that game against Illinois, it was around the same time in January. And the big news story coming out of that game was that Michigan decided to go back to Xavier Simpson as its starting point guard. And after the game, Beilein's quote was that, "I don't think it's cemented, but I'd love to get it cemented." In the last year, since then, Michigan's 35-4, and Simpson started every game. It really says something about how far Simpson has come and really his role in this team. And now we're talking about how important he is.
Seasons can change, too. Like, we make these declarative statements right now on the second week of January, and these things, like, just the amount that can change is just incredible. I keep getting asked, so the Big Ten is just a 2-team race here, right? Michigan State, and blah blah. And I say, yeah, I would think so, but I mean, do you remember what Michigan looked like at this time last year? They ended up at the national championship game. So that's interesting. What was that record? 35-4.
35-4 is what I counted.
Well, if I can seem to remember, like, a lot of what Illinois does with that pressure defense, it seems to me like the emphasis is often on your forwards not committing turnovers. It's the guy who get the ball in unfamiliar places being asked to do things that they're not typically asked to do. Like, that's where they get you. What was their last game here? Northwestern. Yeah. So against Northwestern, this is their last game. Vic Law had 6 turnovers. A.J. Turner had 4 turnovers. And that's the bulk of Northwestern's 15 turnovers. They had 10 from guys who were probably being asked to do things with the ball. Michigan, this is where they're usually, against pressure teams, able to excel. So that should be the case. But, a guy like Charles Matthews, he's got to have one of those nights where he just values the ball and doesn't try to do too much in bad spots. And it's just good decision making on every possession is the biggest key, because there's baskets to be had as long as you can stop, think, and then react.
Isaiah Livers' health also will be important. For sure. I don't think you want to throw Brandon Johns out in the teeth of that trap right now. Last year, though, when Michigan played, the point guards had a lot of the turnovers. Simpson had 5. Simmons and Brooks combined for 3. So 8 of Michigan's 15 turnovers were by point guards. So it speaks to, I think they can really just trap at any point on the court, and that makes it tough. They'll overplay the perimeter. But Simpson also wasn't nearly the same offensive player at this point. He wasn't even close to the sort of comfort and understanding that he has in terms of running Michigan's whole offense has really improved exponentially over the last calendar year. So we'll be interested to see how that plays out this time around.
For all of the good games that Illinois played, when I say good games, I mean schedule-wise, how often have you seen them? I haven't seen them that many times in terms of actually sitting down and watching an Illinois game.
I can't say that I
haven't had much of a need to.
They haven't really been drawing me to the TV.
Well, their numbers are abysmal, and they went 0 for 3 or 0 for 11 on threes against Northwestern in their last game out. So, and
they should have won that game. I watched the end of that game at
68,
Chrysler
66.
before the what game was this week? The Indiana game.
No. Is that good on Illinois? And we'll move on.
Yeah, let's hit on Northwestern quickly.
Sure.
Since that game's coming up on Sunday night. We've already seen these two teams play in a game that Michigan probably should have lost. They kind of fell apart there in the second half and then bounced back. I guess the question here is what happens, how Northwestern defends Michigan will be interesting after they kind of came up with something that worked in terms of cheating off Xavier Simpson, and Michigan had to bench him down the stretch. How do you think that plays out this time around?
Yeah, it will be interesting. I would imagine that you have to come out that way and make him make one, right? And if he makes one, you adjust. But I'd go right at the mental game. Xavier is an emotional person who remembers and is constantly trying to prove himself. So there's something to be said. If I'm Northwestern, the first time he gets a touch there, I'm taking a full step back, dare him to take it, and try to play the mental game. Because if he misses it, look, what is your margin of error here? You're playing Michigan on the road. You're going to be a 13, 14-point underdog. What's the best way to do it? You got to hope some things go your way. So I'm playing off Xavier. I'm going to bunch everyone back, collapse on the zone, although giving Michigan open threes at home is a dangerous play. But I would certainly stick with what got them there the last time because they really had no right being in that type of game with Michigan in the first place.
So here's the problem. Here's the thing. I would call that basically a trick, what they did, and it's hard to pull the same trick twice. Northwestern succeeded in that, and then they took Simpson out of the game. They denied Brazdeikis the ball late, and what happened? Jordan Poole finished the game as a ball screen scorer. Since then, that just basically created Jordan Poole as this go-to option for Michigan in the ball screen game, and I have a hard time. It might be hard for Beilein to adjust to that approach in a timeout huddle on the road and communicate to his team, but do you really think the same thing is going to work on the road against a team that has a couple days to prepare for it? I think they're going to need to do something differently, and I think that I'd be shocked if they're able to play Simpson off the floor this time just by daring him to shoot. But we'll see. The other question I have for you is, if you are Michigan, do you change your approach defensively against Derek Pardon?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if there was any foul trouble in that game. Did the rotation get wonky at all?
Well, Michigan basically played him heads up,
yeah,
and he destroyed Teskey in the first half, and then they doubled a bit in the second half. So the question is, do you double him, or do you play straight up like Michigan usually likes to do in the post with Teskey?
I'd probably play straight up. I'd probably open the game straight up. And if he starts getting his, then, yeah, you can make an adjustment. But Derek Pardon's a nice player, but I'm not going into a game with, we have to double him off the bat. He played well at home. This will be a different story. Different day, different game, different looks. I make him prove that he warrants it before I'm taking guys off of anyone else. But the good thing about going against Northwestern is it is not an offensively explosive team where you can cheat guys off. Like, you can leave some Northwestern players open and not necessarily get burned all day.
Yeah, and I would say they probably got a bit lucky off. It was actually one of the worst defensive games Michigan has played this year, but Northwestern hit some really tough shots. I think they banked a couple. It was sort of one of those things that just shit rolls downhill and on the road sort of performance. But
they were leading. They were leading with under 6 to go. Northwestern had every chance to win that game, and it was one of those, okay, well, here it goes for Michigan. And that was the night that kind of was a different kind of statement for this Michigan team, where they found a way instead of the wheels going off the rails.
It was really the only close game they've won all year, right? Only single-digit win. Western Michigan was 8 points, but that wasn't actually close. So that was really the only time we've seen them tested in that regard.
And they are not going to be through. I'll be curious to see what they do with Ignas Brazdeikis this time, because he just went right at him in that game. He took a ton of shots. What did he take? He took 18 shots in that game. Was not shy. He made some big threes. And it'll be curious to see how they make that adjustment on the other side. We're talking about what Michigan has to do with Northwestern. I would say probably the bigger question is what's Billy Donlin trying to dial up on that defense for the Cats.
Yeah, I think Northwestern's problem going to Denny game is how are we going to score any points, because they are down there near. Actually, there's 3 offenses in the Big Ten right now that have performed worse than Rutgers on a per possession basis. That's not the area you guys want to be in here. Northwestern, Illinois, and Penn State.
Yeesh.
Not great. Or maybe we're just missing out on the Rutgers climb back into, I guess, normalcy. They're not last in offensive efficiency. That's good for them. Anything else on Michigan?
No. I'm trying to just remember back to this that was the big Eli Brooks shot, right? That game. He made a big 3, didn't he?
He did hit a 3 late, but all the plays late were coming out of Jordan Poole. Basically, they denied Iggy, and then Poole had 3 or 4 ball screen possessions down the stretch. One of them did end up, I think, with the Eli Brooks 3 right after they took Simpson out of the game, but
right,
it was Poole as the closer.
Yeah. That's right. They were cleared. He had that big dunk. He had a number of huge plays down the stretch. Yeah, and this was that kind of the beginning of the ascent of him with the ball in his hands and coming off the ball screens and starting to be the primary creator. Is that fair to say?
I certainly think so. And I actually wrote about Jordan this week, and I kind of broke down all the historical stats of Michigan's ball screen offense and ball screen guards. And Poole is trending very much in the right direction. Right now, he's actually the second most efficient ball screen guard that Beeline has coached. Actually, Xavier Simpson's first, because it includes passes out of it. So Michigan's ball screen offense has been through the roof. Poole, I wrote, looks a lot like the role that Nick Stauskas was playing. He's just a little bit behind in usage, and I would not be at all surprised to see that continue to increase. If you want, you can read that article on UM Hoops. Lots of good stats in there. Michigan's actually running more ball screens than they have in any previous Beeline season, and they're more efficient than every team that runs ball screens as often as them, and they're basically near the very top of ball screen efficiency in the country. We've talked a lot about the defense, but I think that the offense coming around is a story to not sleep on here moving forward.
Agreed. I think we said it a couple of weeks ago that eventually the offense would start to would bridge that gap, would start to catch up with the defense, and that would be when people were worried about Michigan reaching its peak and whatnot in November. That is why I have not really bought into that theory, because I always thought that the offense had a much higher upside and that it could eventually be damn near on par with what's a very good defense.
To be fair, I don't know that they've really done both at the same time for any extended period of time.
Mm-hmm. That's also really hard to do.
Yep. I think
really,
they'll probably
really
be
hard to do.
Trying to figure that out and push both of those into full gear in February and March. For sure.
Which is kind of what the guy does, right? That's the special sauce for Beeline. That's why he's won a truck ton of games. So, on to the Big Ten, my man.
Let's do our Big Ten power rankings.
Here we go. We need another theme for that.
Oh, you want a little audio intro?
Yeah.
Slow your roll. People just wanted an intro music. This is not a professional operation.
Oh man! All right. Well,
you can have the first pick though. Who are you taking as your first pick in the power rankings?
I frankly feel like you're putting a ceiling on this podcast with these kind of remarks and this small thinking, but that's all right. We will. We'll start off. I'll take the first pick in the power ranking. I'm going Michigan. Until they lose, they stay here.
Okay. Yeah. Who's playing better right now, though? It'd be easy to say Michigan State.
Absolutely.
But all right, so you're going Michigan State first. Michigan first. I'll take Michigan State second. Mm-hmm. Probably don't have to rehash both of those teams because
I think we should break them down again.
Let's run it back.
Third pick for me. I'm going begrudgingly so. I have to take Maryland. I don't want to. I don't believe in this team at all. I think this is more smoke and mirrors than anything. But in the last 3 games, they have wins against Nebraska and at Minnesota. So it's kind of hard to argue. They're 13-3 overall. They're 4-1 in the Big Ten. They will likely be, if they take care of Indiana this Friday at home, where are they in their AP poll next week? Like top 15, right? Maybe.
I'm not an AP poll believer. I don't.
Nor
care.
am I. But I'm just talking about in terms of national prestige and attention that is given to you. That is pretty much the unfortunate barometer. But
why are you not a believer in Maryland?
Well, its non-conference schedule was bullshit, and they didn't really prove that much. I can appreciate some of their wins here. But I didn't like him in the preseason, right? I am not a big Anthony Cowan guy. I mean, Bruno Fernando is probably a pro, and they've got certainly other really solid pieces. And I'm not a big believer in Mark Turgeon. I'm not a big believer, or I haven't really bought Anthony Cowan as much as some other people have. And that's it. It's more just stubbornness probably than anything. Is that fair?
So, Anthony Cowan, before we talk about him, we have to put a reminder in that it was absolutely ridiculous that he was on the all Big Ten defensive team over Xavier Simpson last year. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I would say he's probably one of the most valuable players in the conference. Maryland is 47 points per 100 possessions better with him on the floor than without him.
Wait, what does that say about Cowan? What does that say about what's behind him?
Well, that's why he's the most valuable.
Oh, okay.
Because he has no one else to support him. He had 23 points in the second half.
Well, put it this way.
At Minnesota last night.
If we came up with a metric that said how great this podcast would be if we just took me off of it and it was just you talking to yourself, it would say that you were really valuable, when in reality, not really.
Ouch. So, that's... All right. Anthony Cowan.
Oh, he shook, folks. All right.
I know you didn't watch the game last night, but he had 23 points in the second half.
Woo, okay, that's pretty good.
Against your esteemed Minnesota Golden Gophers on the road. Mm-hmm. And they dominated that game down the stretch. I had one other point I wanted to make about Maryland.
Yeah.
And that is that their 2 big lineup kind of almost works. And Jalen Smith has been playing really, really well. They still turn the ball over all the time. It seems to be a trend with teams that play 2 bigs.
Right.
But they dominate the backboards, and Smith is also even stretching the floor a little bit in Big Ten play better than he has on the year. He's a really productive player, and that's a lineup that really works. I also thought it was really interesting. There's basically 5 teams in the Big Ten that play like 2 traditional big men. You've got Michigan State, Maryland, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa, which seems to almost be the conference trending backward in terms of the trends in basketball. But it's interesting to see that many post-heavy teams and then think about how they'll play against each other and how they'll play against spread teams. Just food for thought as the league plays out.
And on the 2 big lineup for that, it's also worth remembering that, like, as of 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, it really wasn't even a thing for Maryland. Like, they didn't come into the year with the intention or even plan of playing those 2 together. Like, that really wasn't that much of
They started the whole year.
No.
Yeah.
How many minutes did they actually play together, though, early on?
I mean,
in their actual games, they were still trying to figure out how to play these 2 together early on.
They were. It didn't really work, but they were doing it. I mean, so they've been trying to figure out how to make it work, but it was more that they were doing it and didn't look particularly good.
I just remember having a conversation early on with someone out there at Maryland, like inside Maryland, who was saying that they just, as of a few weeks into the season, had no idea really how to do it, and it wasn't working. So maybe I shouldn't say plan. They weren't planning on doing it. I should say they really didn't know what they were doing or how to actually execute it properly. So it's been a work in progress all year. That's probably taking shape right now. But looking at the stats, like Fernando and Smith have both taken over 100 twos and are both shooting over 62% and both rank in the top 60 nationally in offensive rebound percentage. Like, I know. Yeah, I don't think either of us are big fans of playing two bigs together, but that's pretty hard to argue with.
Yeah, they dominate inside, and they have Cowan to run around and try to get someone a good look. Even their freshman wings are really. I think there's a lot of promise for Maryland going forward.
You know, this is their worst nightmare out there, right? Because the majority of the fan base has been trying to run Turgeon out of there for years, and this is what he does every single time. He takes it right to the line, and then kind of out of nowhere.
He's been 12-6 or better in 3 of his 4 years at Maryland in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. Have you ever dealt with Maryland fans? They've been trying to run Turgeon out every single year, man.
I know, and
because the thing is that they thought the Melo Trumbull teams should have all been Final Four teams.
Yeah, there's a lot of coaches in this league who have to make the NCAA tournament to keep their jobs. It seems like he needs to make a run in the tournament to keep his job. It's a different bar down there for sure.
For sure. It's that ACC mentality. They're not football schools, man.
All right. Next up, we've got. I'm taking Wisconsin here. I know they lost at home to Minnesota, which is not a great look, but there are only 3 teams in the Big Ten that have 2 road wins, and Wisconsin is one of the 3. I'm not sure anyone's going crazy over wins at Penn State and Iowa, but Iowa looks to be a good team at home, and Wisconsin won there. Those aren't Big Ten wins at Rutgers, so that counts for something. I think the key here is Dimitri Trice. He's 5 of his last 23 from three-point range, and he started the year 35 of 63. They need him to be a automatic shooter, or I think they kind of lose that next gear offensively. They're just 8th in the Big Ten right now in offensive efficiency in Big Ten games.
Interesting. Not a big hit to Wisconsin for a couple losses in the last couple of games between Western Kentucky. And then what was that last one before that?
Minnesota,
thank you. I had Indiana ahead of them, and so I will take. We are on 1, 2, 3, 4. We're on 5.
4th. No, 5th.
Yeah. So I'm going to take Indiana here, even coming off the loss. I actually liked a lot of what I saw from IU in that game, and I do think if it weren't for some of that early foul trouble, it would have been a better game, or maybe at least closer through most of the second half. But with Morgan and Langford, and I do think some of the pieces around them will eventually make. I'm not saying a star third guy will emerge, but I do think maybe there will be more positives than negatives, maybe to come out of that secondary group. But I'm not going to ding them for losing at Michigan. I think there's still a lot to like about that team, so I got them at 5.
Yeah, Indiana, they're basically an even efficiency margin through 4 games, which is kind of what they've been for the last month. They are in a close game almost every game, and they've come out on the positive side, but we need to see if they have some sort of next level, because just throw the ball into Juwan Morgan 25 times isn't going to work every game. I think they just need to find something else. I'll take Ohio State next. The Buckeyes lost at home, which is not a great look, but if you're losing to Michigan State at home, it's not the worst either. I still have a hard time putting my finger on this team. They have played really well at times, but I don't know that there's anything reliable about what they do other than Caleb Weston inside, and the guards are just like rolling the dice every game. You have any thoughts on Ohio State?
Yeah, I think that this will be a team that will be better in February. I agree we have them ranked here, but as some of their younger guys maybe figures things out just a little bit more, guys like Luther Muhammad, guys like Kyle Young, guys like not Woods, he's a senior, but maybe like even like a Dwayne Washington, guys like that. I think they have a decent amount of upside. I'm not saying that they're going to like work their way up to like a 4 seed or anything like that in the NCAA tournament, but I did like what they did in that game, and playing Michigan State's pretty damn hard at this point, as we all know, and I think a lot of coaches would take, all right, give me C.J. Jackson and Caleb Wesson and some pieces around them, and I'll go see how I do. Considering what the middle of the league looks like this year, I don't think that's a bad fit. So I'll be really curious to see what they do going forward. Their next game is Rutgers and then Iowa. But their next big matchup is Maryland. They get them at home on January 18th. That's definitely worth watching. Am I up?
Fair enough.
All right.
Yeah.
So we're on 7. I'm going to take your Minnesota Gophers. We were saying this before the pod that like we went from a couple weeks back trying to do these rankings and saying like, man, all these teams are so good, it's really hard to put one on top of the other, blah blah blah, and now suddenly that they've all, as we kind of predicted, beaten up on each other a little bit, everyone's starting to kind of show some warts or show some wounds or fall back to reality or whatever cliche you want to use, where now it's the opposite, and it's kind of getting harder to realize like, okay, well, who is really good to put on top of one another. So it's interesting the way it can swing, but Minnesota still has that road win at Wisconsin on its Big Ten resume. And, Wisconsin was the third team, number 3 on this power ranking. So that still carries some weight. But they also have a win over Nebraska as well. And, yeah, they lose to Maryland, but that's proving maybe a little bit more to not be too bad, despite
that
what I said.
That second half performance last night was not inspiring from
didn't see it. I didn't
Minnesota.
see it. I wish I had. What went awry?
I mean, Maryland missed every shot in the first half and then basically made every shot in the second half. And that's just the kind of game you have to finish the deal at home.
Sure.
And you kind of give back anything you gained from that win at Wisconsin by dropping a home game this early.
Maryland scored 1.24 points per possession on the road.
Yep.
Damn.
And they scored probably less than a point per possession. I think I tweeted out, it was something like an 86% effective field goal percentage in the second half.
Why is Isaiah Washington going 1 for 7 in this game? The hell's that about?
Well, he didn't even play in the Wisconsin game. He got a DNP in that game, so going.
So he got a DNP and then was given 17 minutes and went 1 for 7. That's a Richard Pitino special. Right
well,
there.
They had a lot of foul trouble.
Okay, well I'm saying I didn't see the game.
2 guards in foul trouble. It was a mess. I don't know. I just can't have any trust in Minnesota right now. I'm gonna take Nebraska next. I know they're 1-3, but they lost 3 road games and they've played a tough schedule. They have not been that bad. Most of their losses have been somewhat close. I think that the ceiling on this team is limited by a lot, and these are the kind of road games we thought maybe they're good enough to win this year, but even still, I think they deserve kind of to be right around this midpoint in the league.
Okay. I feel like every team now kind of comes with a shrug, right? Like, okay, so next I guess I'm going to take Iowa. They were ranked as we talked about before the show. They were ranked in
last
the
week.
AP Top 25 a week ago, and that shine has kind of worn off a little bit. But at the same time, they just beat Nebraska. What do you? I mean, they're 12-3 on paper. They have an NCAA tournament resume.
They're allowing 120 points per 100 possessions in Big Ten games.
Yes, not great. So their wins this year are Oregon,
Iowa
State, and Nebraska. It's not great, but you do see that 12-3 number, and it's like, damn.
Good teams will go into Iowa City and lose this year. Their offense is still very good, but their defense, they're just going to get blown out on some of these road games once the wheels fall off. I just don't trust their defense at all.
They did just beat Nebraska.
They did at home. They're very good at
who
home. I mean, Iowa State's a really good home win.
All right. I'm just saying. I don't know if I would have had Nebraska ahead of them.
Where was the game played? That's all. You have to use that as the lens to look at any team.
You know I like Nebraska more. They've been pissing me off all year. I think they should be like the fourth best team in the league. And maybe at some point they will be, but this has been massively disappointing so far.
So I guess you're going to make me take Purdue next. I kind of told you how I felt about Purdue earlier. I'm not buying this team's long-term viability. They're a good team at home, but I just think they're flawed. I don't really have much more to add on.
Yeah, we talked about them. I mean, it's Carson Edwards, and it looks like Carson Edwards with like the Washington Generals at times. There's just not a lot there. Although I do shout out to a Michigander. Travion Williams has been pretty impressive the way that he's turned around. I didn't even think he was going to crack the rotation at the beginning of this year, and here he is playing meaningful minutes and being really, really productive. He was really productive last night. And look, he's not in the best shape, and he still needs to get in much better shape, and he has a ways to go. But go ahead.
How much I strongly disagree with playing him just to match up with Michigan State.
He's been playing before this. He's been getting run before this.
He's played double-digit minutes once, so he's getting a little more time.
But in recent weeks, he's actually been getting. He went from like being completely out of the rotation to 5 minutes against Iowa, Belmont 7 minutes. He played 9 minutes against Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame was really his first. Actually, put him out there and let's see what happens. But he's a guy who has that kind of feel around the basket where he can just score. And we're sitting here talking about they have no one else to play around Edwards. At least friggin' Williams can put the ball in the basket. That's more than you can say about most of their roster. So
that's fair. Him playing speaks to how poorly Harms and Bujo are playing for them.
That is very fair to say. Yes. All right, my turn.
Yeah,
I think we're on 11.
Yep.
We're gonna go with Northwestern. I mean, we're kind of down here at the. It's interesting to try to figure out whether Northwestern they're like right on that line. Are they in this group that we were just talking about? Your Minnesotas, your Iowas, your Purdue's, blah, blah, blah. Or are they in the bottom rung of your Rutgers, your Penn States, your Illinois? Right now, I would lean toward the former. I think Northwestern's probably a little bit better than the bottom. But they're going to have to figure out how to win close games, which has been the bugaboo all year. But they did get one at Illinois, home against Illinois, to get to 1-3 in the league. But it's just been a rough road for Northwestern. I'm not really sure what's the best that they can hope for this year. But I do think it's kind of that, not be in the basement, but at least be kind of in the mix for teams in the conversation.
Yep. I will take. Oof, this is tough at the end of the league here. I will take Illinois next. I think.
Wow.
I just haven't.
They've done nothing
for them to be bad.
Wait a second.
They've played a tough schedule. You want me to take Rutgers or Penn State over them?
I'm just saying. A few weeks ago, we moved Illinois into that bottom spot, the 14th spot. They have won no games since then to warrant coming out of it.
Yeah, well, Penn State scored 107 points in 135 possessions.
Is that bad?
That's 0.79 points per possession. That's terrible this week.
You can make a case for Rutgers, though, for having fewest Big Ten losses amongst the remaining teams. Well, because they played one less game.
That's where we're at. They were up. I can't pick Rutgers because they were up 15-7 or something like that, and then lost 77-63. They just got blown off the court after that.
At least they have a winning record, and they won at Miami. They have a better win than Penn State and Rutgers both have better wins than Illinois does. Because Penn State beat Virginia Tech.
Penn State played a single possession and lost to Northwestern, and they were competitive at Indiana. I just think they have more promise.
That's very generous. Which one did you go with there? You said Illinois at
Yep.
12?
So you're taking Penn State or Rutgers?
That's nonsense. I'm going to go Rutgers.
All right. At least you agree that Penn State's the worst. Penn State scored 79 points per 100 possessions and had their coach get suspended in the same week. It's not impressive stuff.
We can't go too long on this because I got to get over to campus for a press conference. But let's talk about Chambers for a second here. What did you think of that suspension?
I will be glad when no one talks about the suspension because the amount of people talking about it far outweighs any importance that I gave to it. I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable. I don't think it would have been unreasonable if he wasn't suspended. And I think the takes around Pat Chambers being suspended for a game are just a little exhausting, to be honest.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it's about Pat Chambers being suspended for a game. I think it's about a coach doing what he did being suspended for a game, because that shove that he did, I don't think is like that egregious. It's not that out of the, like, I feel like I've seen coaches do that before, and now we're at a time where that's deemed a suspension by a power conference team. So I don't think the conversation is about Pat Chambers. I think the conversation is about, what coaches can and can't do in 2019. I think that's the interesting part of what this is, and that's why Izzo went off about it when actually he didn't go off about it. He was asked about it and couldn't help himself and had to answer. That's where that came from.
Do you think his shove or outburst, whatever you want to call it, was about motivation or frustration?
I think it was about motivation. I think it was trying to snap a kid and get his attention a little bit. I don't think it was angry. I don't think it was, you son of a bitch, blah, blah, blah. I don't think it was that. I think it was fiery, in the moment type stuff.
Best part of it was Lamar Stevens' reaction, from my opinion.
Remind me what he did.
He just he was standing in the middle of it, and he just kind of looked back like, ooh, and then just started doing a little clap, and then tried to act like nothing happened. I appreciated it.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, put it this way. I get the suspension. It's kind of, there's just a line now where you just can't lay hands on a kid. And what I have found since writing the story that I wrote on what Izzo said, and then the conversation we had afterward about it, that if you go through the comments on the story and if you go through Twitter, it's fascinating that it seems like a topic that literally falls along the same lines as like any other polarizing issue. You say like gun control, like you're going to believe one thing or you're going to believe the other, and the odds of one person crossing that line and seeing what the other side feels is slim to none. So like on this thing, it's either like can't put hands on a kid, period. Suspension is warranted, or it's this country's a bunch of wusses, and what's wrong with a guy trying to get another guy fired up, and you can push them and shove them and whatever. We're too soft as a culture, like, and that's it. It's just black and white on the two things, and I don't know. I will say this: Pat Chambers has to be smarter than that. He is already pretty much at the end of his line. They were probably ready to get rid of him last year before he went and won the NIT. You have to be smarter than to put yourself in this situation. There's a lot of people out there who are ready to get rid of him, and he just threw a bucket of chum in the water.
That's what I was kind of getting at, in the sense that I think it was just his desperation and frustration boiling over, whereas like someone like Izzo does a lot of what you say motivational tactics, getting in people's face. I think that's more calculated, right? Mm-hmm. Like Izzo knows he gets frustrated and he knows what he's doing to try to motivate a kid. I don't know if that was necessarily as strategic from Pat Chambers, but I also don't know what Penn State huddles are like on a day-to-day basis, right? I assume that that same sort of thing could have happened at any other time. No one would have noticed if the TV camera didn't cut to it at that moment, would they?
No, I had no idea. No one in the gym had any idea. No one even knew what the hell he was talking about in the press conference.
Yeah.
And put it this way, you want to talk about a lack of interest? They had their this is to put it into context for people about how little anyone cares about Penn State. They had their press. Pat Chambers had I almost said Tom Chambers, by the way, but Pat Chambers almost had had his press conference yesterday, Tuesday, in Happy Valley, to kind of preview their upcoming game, and it was his first press conference since the suspension. How many people do you think were at that press conference?
I'll go over under 2.5.
I was going to say, think about it. TV, radio, student people, radio, whatever.
7.
It was 5. There's 5 people at the press conference. After a Big Ten coach was coming back from a suspension for putting his hands on a player.
Well, that's why Pat Chambers is still at Penn State.
Yeah.
And it's kind of how it goes.
It's a hard job. It's a really, really hard job. But, all right. Is that it?
Yeah.
Woo.
I think we're a wrap. I'm just hoping that you actually remembered to record this podcast, but we'll see.
I did. It looks that
good.
Way. You got me nervous there for a second, though. So, all right, folks, make sure to go subscribe to umhoops.com for all of Dylan's outstanding analysis and the video work. Who's the guy that you have doing the video stuff right now?
Gibson Piper.
It's excellent.
Doing some nice play breakdowns and some fun stuff.
Really, really good stuff. And then check out theathletic.com/Detroit to find that Michigan and Michigan State basketball coverage, and check out our national coverage on the college basketball page. And, of course, rate, subscribe, like, share, love the Moving Screen podcast from Dylan and myself. We appreciate all of you listening, and we will be back soon with another episode. Thanks a lot. Be sure to tip your bartenders and your servers.